Okay, it's 12 o'clock, so we'll make a start. I'm sure a couple more people will join as we progress. Just before I start, can I just check after my last little endeavor with this that everyone can see my slides? You should have a nice big white screen with SQL Server 2008 and SQL Server 2008 R2 as a big headline. If you can't see that, if you can just type something into chat so I know, that'll be great, but I'm going to assume that you can. So let's make a start. Hi everyone, and welcome to my webinar titled SQL Server 2008 R2 D2 the sequel. This is going to be all about SQL Server 2008 and SQL Server 2008 R2. Both these versions went out of extended support with Microsoft on the 9th of July this year, so about 3 weeks ago now. That date's come and gone, and I'm sure there's lots of people out there still with SQL Server 2008 and SQL Server 2008 R2 instances running in your environment. Maybe you're thinking about upgrading, maybe you're wondering about what options you've got available, and what can you do now the version has gone out of support. Well, my name's Gethin Ellis, and in this short session today, I'm going to be talking about the options available to you if you've still got one of these legacy versions of SQL Server running in your environment. Let me just get my clicker here. Click on here. So I'll start by giving you a bit of information about me. I've been working with SQL Server for about 20 years. I've had a lot of jobs in that time, from report writer, web developer, and database administrator. Now, for the last 12 years or so, I've been running a small consulting and training business on gethinellis.com. And of late, we've partnered with our friends at Widen to offer cost-effective end-to-end SQL Server solutions in the following areas. So we do things like SQL Server migrations, strangely enough, upgrading legacy instances of SQL Server, or migrating the databases that live on there to the latest and greatest version, albeit on premises or in the cloud. We get involved in architecture and design, so we can design you high availability solutions and disaster recovery solutions to meet quite extensive SLAs. We offer SQL Server health checks and performance tune-ups, and we offer training on the Microsoft Data Platform, to including the official suite of Microsoft official courses. Now you can follow me on Twitter. I am at Gethin_Ellis. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. I do follow back. If you've got any questions on today's session, my email address is on the screen there as well. As we're going along, I'm making our way through the presentation today. If you do have any questions, there is a Q&A pod. If you type your questions in there, I will try and answer them before the end of the session. So let's start by understanding what we are going to be talking about. So in this webinar, we're gonna understand perhaps how many other people are suffering with legacy SQL Server instances as well. How many are out there in the wild? Now, estimated based on what I've seen, that's where that figure is going to come from, and there's a few other resources I can point you to that have got a similar experience that I have in the number of SQL Server 2008 and R2 instances running out there. We're going to look at what options you have available and what you can do next. So you can perhaps do nothing. You can get a custom support contract if you need to remain compliant and keep SQL Server 2008. You can migrate your server to an IaaS in Azure, an IaaS VM in Azure, and you will continue to get the security updates for free. Or you can modernize. You can upgrade and migrate your SQL Server 2008 instances. And I'll give you some examples about what I would do in certain situations. We'll talk about in-place upgrades and side-by-side migrations. We look at some free tools that Microsoft make available to you to help you and assist you with migrations, and we'll talk about the migration process too. We have a short demo looking at some of the tools that are available to you too. So when it comes to answering the question, who is still using SQL Server? Well, it's probably a good time to have a poll. We've only got a small number in the session today, but I'm just going to launch this poll and get you to try out my new technology. And what I'm asking there, if you can just take the time to vote, what's the oldest version of SQL Server you have running? And I've got 2005 and older. If someone can just take the time to vote there, we've got a couple. So someone's running 2012. I'll just give you a minute to fill that in. Still SQL Server 2012, 2008, 2012. So quite a lot of people on SQL Server 2012 as being their oldest version, but there are a couple of people, some with 2005 and older, and some with SQL Server 2008 as well. Thanks for taking the time to fill that in, guys. It doesn't quite, well, perhaps it does stack up. What have we got? We've got 2 out of 5 people. What's that? 40% of people running on an older version of SQL Server, an out of support version, based on those very small figures there. That pretty much equates to what I have seen. Between 30 and 40% is probably the figure. We are going to run a poll on LinkedIn and Twitter, and I'll share those results for you in a blog post at a later date as well. But that is kind of representative of what I have seen out there in the wild too. There are lots of people with running older versions of SQL Server. So at the consultancy practice here at gettinellis.com, we've got both large and small clients. And it's usually always the way the smaller clients with the less SQL Server infrastructure, the smaller footprint, they find it easier to keep within, say, 2 versions of the latest SQL Server version. And it's larger clients with a large estate that struggle to keep their entire estate on a supported version. And these are usually the ones facing the sort of end of support cliff edge that has been and gone on the 9th of July. Now, we've seen SQL Server infrastructure at many companies and many businesses, and at an estimate, I was going to go between 20 and 30%. You guys coming in at 40 kind of ties in with some other polls that I've seen. Brent Ozar conducted a poll recently, and their figures were in that sort of a region, 2008 and below. Now, there could be a number of reasons for this. Sometimes the application, the database supports, they require an older version. Maybe the applications are also coming to the end of life, but the end of life support dates don't quite match up. So you've got a period of time where your data platform's out of support and your application is going out to support and you're going to be migrating soon. So there could be a number of reasons for this. And sometimes these applications are just critical to your business. How do you end up at this point? The applications are critical to your business. The business don't want to introduce any new risk. They don't want to disrupt the application by performing a migration to a new version, which is where this end of support cliff edge can become a problem. The businesses are quite happy, it works fine as is, and all the while we're ticking down to that version of SQL Server going out of support. Now, as I've said already, extended support with Microsoft ended on the 9th of July, earlier this month. You might be in the planning stages or perhaps executing a plan to manage the transition from your old data platform to a new one. And if you find yourself in a situation where you've got SQL Server 2008 R2 and below still running, then you've got 4 options that are available to you. The first one, run on out of support software. You can pay for a custom support agreement with Microsoft where you'll continue to get security updates, so it'll help you remain compliant. You can migrate the workload to Microsoft Azure, a virtual machine in Microsoft Azure, and you will continue to get the security updates for free. That's not any other cloud provider. You can't go to AWS or whatever and get those updates as well. It has to go to Azure. Or you can modernize and migrate your SQL Server and your databases to the latest and greatest SQL Server platform or somewhere in between. And there are pros and cons of each approach. Now, if you decide to do nothing and run on out of support software, you're going to take the risk associated with running on out of support software. But the big advantage there, you've got no work to do. You just carry on as you were. Okay. Now, that's probably not good advice for the long term, but there's no further work to do. Some of the disadvantages of doing nothing is the longer you run on the out of support software, the greater the chance you're going to encounter a security vulnerability or you're going to fail a compliance test. Okay, and also if anything goes wrong with your data platform, you're not going to be able to get support from Microsoft. So when would you do this, or when would I do this, I should say? You have got to be happy with the risk. Okay, that's the ultimate thing here. You've got to be happy with the risk on running out of support software. Me personally, I would consider it when perhaps the workloads are running on the old data platform, they're coming to an end of life. So the applications are coming to an end of life as well. They don't quite match up. So it might be that we're going to do an application refresh and a data refresh, and that might happen over the course of a month or two after the out of support deadline. Then I might consider doing nothing for a month or two. Okay, I might even be pushed, if depending on circumstances, the company I'm working for's appetite to risk, maybe up to 6 months, but that's really pushing it. Ultimately, it's your risk, it's your choice. But any longer than sort of a month or two, up to perhaps 6 months at the push, I would be looking at some of the other options available to me. Then we have the custom support contract. So this is similar to the first. This is similar to the first option, where we do nothing. But instead of doing nothing, you do nothing, but pay some money to Microsoft for a custom support agreement. Now, the main advantage here is there's not a lot involved except paying the money, but you get security updates. Okay, so you're potentially remaining compliant. Okay, and I think that can go on up to maybe 2022 or something along those lines. You get a few extra years in with your custom support agreement. The main disadvantage is the cost involved, which I think is quite substantial. If I've understood the documents I've read correctly, it's in the region of 75% of the full license cost of the latest version of SQL Server and Windows Server. So it's quite expensive to stay as you are and get those security updates. Now, in all my time working and upgrading with SQL Server, I haven't executed this option. When would I? I think I'd need to be in a situation where an upgrade was not possible for whatever reason that may be. Maybe the third-party supplier doesn't support my particular application on a later version, and I need to stay on it for as long as I can, and I had a strict need to remain compliant. We go back to the application going out of support as well. If that is retiring, but the gap between the data platform and the app going out of support was too long for my risk threshold, I would consider that. So I've got some examples. I've got a previous client that uses Dynamics, and they've got a third-party bolt-on to Dynamics, and the third party have said they won't support certain levels of SQL Server. It's only up to sort of SQL Server 2012 and a various cumulative update level in there. They won't go any higher than that. So in that case, granted, this is not, we're still getting security updates for the version of SQL Server we are running on. But if I was in this boat with them on this version, I would be considering a custom support contract in this case. Now, back earlier in the year, might have even been towards the tail end of last year, when people were gearing up for SQL Server 2008 and R2 going out to support, Microsoft used it as an opportunity to perhaps get people to migrate into Azure and migrate to the cloud. So they decided to allow SQL Server 2008 and 2008 R2 VMs running in Azure to get these security updates that you pay for with a custom support agreement on premises for free for a further 3 years. Now, the main advantage here is if for whatever reason you're stuck on your data platform and your operating system level, okay, you'll continue to get security updates. So the cost of the security updates and cost of the custom support agreement is minimal once you're in Azure. Okay, but then you're in Azure, and then it's only a small jump to the full maybe platform of a service, Azure SQL database offering a managed instance, or continue running on an IaaS VM. Now, the main disadvantage here is you're going to need to move off premises, so that needs to be an option that's available to you. Okay, and if you can't really exercise this option. There is work involved in shifting from on-premises to Azure, so doing a lift and shift of that VM to the cloud, there's going to need to be some migration effort involved as well. So I would probably look at this option if my roadmap, my infrastructure technical roadmap going forward allowed for cloud migrations. It was something we were looking to do as part of a wider strategy, and I really was stuck on 2008 or 2008 platform. Okay, and don't forget, when the main disadvantage is you do have to lift and shift to the cloud, and there will be a cost for running that server in the cloud as well. So there'll be a fee depending on what spec server you end up using for your VM in the cloud. You're going to have to pay ongoing costs for that as well. So it's not, whilst the security updates are free, you will have to pay for the resources you use in the cloud. And then you've got modernise and upgrade, the fourth option. I say the fourth option is probably the option that most people would choose. Okay, you can upgrade your on-premises SQL Server estate to use, say, SQL Server 2017, which at the time of delivering this presentation is the latest version of SQL Server that has been released to market. But earlier this week, there was a SQL Server Community Technology Preview, CTP, release that contains a whole bunch of cool new features like big data clusters that are now available to the general public, but they're not released to market yet, so you can't really use that in production yet. Okay, or if on-premises isn't your thing, perhaps you could migrate to a cloud provider, maybe AWS or Azure, and use an IaaS VM solution to run your SQLs there, or go with one of the platform as a service offerings, Azure SQL Database being the one I'm thinking of off the top of my head. Now, there are a number of advantages to this approach. Your database workloads, they're going to be running on an in-support data platform. And if you go to SQL Server 2017 or a cloud provider running these versions, you've got a very long support window. There's likely to be new features in the latest and greatest of SQL Server that you can make use of. If you're currently on SQL Server 2008, SQL Server 2008 R2, you've probably never implemented an availability group yet, okay? But you can make use of those features. Availability groups were introduced in SQL Server 2012. And if you're in the jobs market, you're looking for people to help you work with SQL Server, you're more likely to find people with skills in the later technology. Those skills would be more readily available to you in the job market. Now, the disadvantages of modernizing, we'll call them disadvantages. There are some drawbacks and costs associated with this. The licensing model between 2008 and 2008 R2 changed. Okay, it moved for an enterprise edition in particular. If you were licensing on a per processor model in 2008 and 2008 R2, it changed to a per core model in SQL Server 2012. So it's very likely you might have to pay more for your SQL Server licenses if you haven't had to do that already. And if your workload and application is near the end of life, the planning and work involved in upgrading might not be worth it. If it's going to be retired off and there's a project bringing something else in, it might not be worth upgrading your existing stuff if that's going to happen anyway. I'd use this approach if the application and workloads that currently sit on the legacy data platform, they're still in use, they're going to be in use beyond the very short term. This is something I would be looking to do. Okay, so when it comes to migrating or upgrading, there's two options available. We can do an in-place upgrade or we can do a side-by-side migration. Now, in-place upgrade, what we do there, we've got our old SQL Server 2008 box, we've got perhaps running on Windows Server 2008 as well. We install over the top of the legacy instance with SQL Server 2017. Now, there are a number of benefits to this, but there are a number of drawbacks as well. This is my least favorite option for upgrading and migrating my SQL Server databases to the latest and greatest version, but it is an option you have available to you. And it's, as long as the servers are as long as I've got complete control over them and I don't need to worry about the outage window and I'm not too worried about rolling back, then I would consider it. So you don't need any new hardware. Not that hardware is much of an issue with the virtual estate most of us are probably using these days. The instance name is going to stay the same, so you don't need to change any connection strings from your applications. If you don't care what's there, except it needs to be on a newer version of SQL Server, then this is perhaps an approach you can take. There are a number of drawbacks. Okay, you've got your production SQL Server 2008 instance. I don't know if you've got a dev or a UAT box, but once you've upgraded that box, rolling back is difficult. Okay, and once you've taken the database to a new version of SQL Server, and this is regardless of the approach you take, you can't restore it to a previous version. So if you were rolling back an in-place upgrade where you've upgraded the SQL Server 2008 instance in place, you'd have to reinstall, to roll it back, you'd have to reinstall the legacy version of SQL Server, restore the databases from the backup, and obviously you'd have removed SQL Server 2017 before that. It's quite hard to tell that everything is well. Hopefully you would have tested this down your stack, but if you haven't, you're kind of going to be stuck. So you're kind of just assuming it's going to work afterwards. Now, some of the tools I'll introduce later on, they can actually help you identify any issues if you are going to take this approach that you might need to fix after, so you've got a plan in place for dealing with those. And the downtime for this is as long as it takes you to perform the installation over the top. And bear in mind, you might need to refresh the operating system as well. So in the diagram we've got here, it's just a quick show of what we've got. We've got our old, this is an example, SQL Server DB01 instance with a database called DB01, and it's running SQL Server 2008 R2. We do an in-place upgrade. We install SQL Server 2017 over the top, and we've still got our database name, our instance name, IP address, and the rest of it stays exactly as it was before. Now, in order to put SQL Server 2017 on here, you would definitely have to update the operating system if it wasn't running on a later version of Windows. If it's on Windows Server 2008, then only SQL Server 2017 will run on it. Then my preferred approach is the side-by-side migrations. So what you do in this case, you have a fresh build of SQL Server. You spin up a new VM. You have a fresh install of SQL Server 2017. You configure the new SQL Server to fit into your environment. Perhaps a nice new fresh operating system as well. And then you can migrate your databases from the old instance to the new instance. Okay, and there's a few approaches you can take. You can use the data migration assistant, which is a tool we're going to look at, but I would more likely use detach and attach, bring reality, backup and restore. Now, when you do this approach the traditional way, you need to worry about things like orphaned users, and there are some stored procedures Microsoft provide, like SP Help Rev Login, that will script out your logins from your old server that sit in the master database, and you can recreate them on your new server with the same security identifiers as they had before. So when the databases come over, there's no orphan login issue between the logins in master and the users in the database. Now, I like this approach. It gives you easy fallback. Okay, you can do it database at a time. So if you've got a big database with lots of different databases sat on your SQL Server 2008, you can take one at a time, maybe picking some low-hanging fruits in the first instance to move across. And if they happen not to work in your environment, you can quite easily fail back because the database is still there. But obviously, you can't back up and restore to an older version of SQL Server, so you have to have some way of moving the data if there is any. But hopefully, you're going to test all this in advance, so when you actually do this on production, you're in pretty good shape. You can do lots of testing with this, so you could migrate everything to 2017, test it, and then do the migration for real. And you can use techniques to minimize downtime too, so you can utilize things like, well, previously you could use like log shipping. You can still use log shipping to keep your 2017 instance warm and up to date, and you can do a whole bunch of the prep work beforehand, so your migration window ends up being very small. You copy the logins, you migrate your jobs, you migrate your SSIS packages, you configure your TDE, you set up all your jobs ready to go, and then you just migrate the databases as and when. And if they're particularly large databases, you could do that 2 or 3 weeks before, and then keep that database in sync by log shipping across to the new instance. And then when it comes to cutover, you take your last log backup, apply it to the new SQL Server 2017 instance, take the 2008 one online, repoint your applications, and you're good to go, keeping that window very, very small. Some of the drawbacks to this approach, you need 2 sets of hardware, be it physical or virtual hardware. You can have one with the old instance on and a new server for 2017. Depending on how you've configured your application, if you're not using sort of DNS redirect, you will need to change your application connection strings, and that's not really an issue really, but it is something that would need to be done. And the whole process end to end is likely to take longer than doing an in-place upgrade, but there is lots of stuff you can do while keeping your old instance online. This is my favorite approach. For me, it reduces the risk the most to my end clients. So on the diagram here, just a visualization of what I've just described. We've got a server, SQL DB01, running 2008 R2 and a DB1 server. I spin up a new server, call it SQL DB02. This is running SQL Server 2017. And then I migrate the database, I migrate any jobs associated with it and logins to that new instance, and we are good to go. And I would move that using backup and restore. But you can use attach and detach, and there is a way of syncing your databases using the data migration assistant as well to help you with this. So using this approach, the side-by-side migration approach or an in-place upgrade, there's a process for upgrading. You're going to need to discover what you've got. Now, if you're a small shop, you might know exactly what you have, but I've worked in environments where it's not completely known, the entire infrastructure. And Microsoft have got a tool that will help you discover what you have. Then you can assess the databases that sit on your legacy instances to decide whether they're actually okay to move or if there's something you need to change to make them work on the newer version. Then you're going to want to test that, maybe experiment with it, make sure you're going to get perhaps the same performance as you got before, that all your code works as expected, that your application can connect to it. Then you're going to migrate and cut over to the new instance. And this is kind of the same if it's in place and side-by-side migration. I'm probably going to talk more about side-by-side migration here because that's the process I would really use. But it's exactly the same process if it's in place. You just do different things at different times. And then you're going to do your post-migration testing too. Now, if you've got a sprawling environment, which you may have, you could have lots and lots of SQL Server instances, and I've worked for several organizations that have got a lot of SQL Server instances. So are you able to answer what legacy SQL servers you have? Do you know the edition they're running? Okay. Do you know how many databases reside on those legacy instances? How are they set up? How are they configured? What version of Windows are they running? What hardware are they running on? Now, Microsoft have got a tool called Maps, and it's a Microsoft assessment and planning service. Or it's a map tool that will assess your environment for you and generate some really cool reports that will show you all this stuff. Now, Microsoft come up with this tool because of how they do their licensing. They say, okay, we'll run our maps tool and we'll tell you what you've got and we'll tell you how much they've got to pay us. But it can be really useful for identifying what versions of SQL Server you've got out there as well. And we'll have a look at that in just a bit. Then we're going to assess those databases. We've discovered them. Okay, we need to migrate. Can they be migrated to a newer version? Well, there's the data migration or database migration assistant will help us assess that. It will look for compatibility issues. Is anything going to break if I move between 2008 R2 and 2017? Is there going to be any changes in behavior? Are there any features that I'm currently using that are deprecated? Can I make use of any new features? Am I going to get anything in terms of performance, storage, or security? And you can actually use this tool to help you perform the migration too. And this tool will help you migrate from both. It'll definitely help you migrate between on-premises versions, and I think it would probably help you migrate, assuming you have the connectivity between, say, an AWS SQL Server and an on-premises SQL Server, and it will look at Azure SQL databases too to see if you can migrate that way. So if you want to take databases from a 2008 R2 instance and put them on Azure SQL database, it will be able to assess that for you and actually help you with the migration as well. Then there's a tool called the Database Experimentation Assistant. This is a useful tool for testing, looking at compatibility and execution errors, looking at queries that will potentially degrade as a result of migrating, and allow you to compare workloads. Now, what you need to do for that, you need to capture a workload running on 2008. You can run it through this experimentation tool and output all that for you. Now, I don't have a demo on this particular tool, but it's just worth mentioning. And once you've done all that, you've done your discovery, you've assessed, you've tested, you might want to remediate any issues that are going to stop your migration from happening. Okay. You might want to do that before, you might want to do it after. Either way, you're going to want to plan for fixing them. Okay, you can do your remediation. Then you've got your pre-cutover stuff. So if you're doing your side-by-side migration, you can move your logins. You can use SP Help Rev Login to help you move your logins. You can script out and move your jobs, changing any parameters that you need in there that are referencing given instances. You can set up any linked servers that you've currently got available to you. You can move your SSIS packages. You can move any certificates that are used for TDE, and you can do all that before you actually migrate, so that new server is set up and good to go before you do anything. And then you can cut over and migrate your databases. So we're going to copy or move from our legacy instances to our newly installed 2017 instance, and we can use the migration assistant, or we can use detach and attach, or backup and restore. I would probably nearly always go for this approach, but I have looked at this, particularly when migrating to Azure SQL database. It was quite useful for that, because you can migrate an empty schema and you can make changes to that schema that might not work in Azure SQL database, and then you can keep the databases synced up using that tool. So it's got some uses, but for an on-premises to on-premises, I would likely still go for this one. That's just probably my personal choice, if I was having to justify that to you. And then we've got post cutover. So you've done everything. Are you finished? Well, Not quite. Okay, using this process that I've got on the slide here, it can be useful to give you predictable performance during your upgrade or migration. Okay, so what we do, we take our databases from SQL Server 2008 R2 and we move it to SQL Server 2014. Now, assuming we can keep the same compatibility mode on 2017, we can then turn on query store. We can collect data on our workload running on the new server on the old compatibility mode. Okay, we'll make sure we capture that workload for a given time. We can then change the compatibility mode to the latest one. Okay, and then we can use query store to help us fix any regression we get as a result of the changes that have been made in things like the cardinality estimator and the query optimizer between our SQL Server 2008 R2 and SQL Server 2017. And there have been some changes in that area during those various the various versions of SQL Server up to that point. Okay, so let's have a look at a bit of a demo. I'm just going to drop out of my presentation for just a second. We'll come back to that in a minute. And I'm going to jump on to, for those of you that at my last presentation, I've got the same environment set up. So let me just drop off and show you my Hyper-V for a sec. Not that one. There he is. Here's my Hyper-V. So I've got a few machines running. Okay, this one's off. My data science desktop is off, but I've got my availability group and I've got my cluster, and I've introduced a SQL Server 2008 instance for the purposes of this demo. So I'm going to open up. I've got the migration assessment tool installed. This is a free tool. If you just go to your favorite search engine, go to Google. I've got chat. Remember, SQL won't change the compatibility mode for you. You must do that yourself, otherwise you won't get the benefit of the new query engine. Yes, thank you, David. That's a good point in case that wasn't clear. Keep the old compatibility mode the same. Okay. Enable query store, let the workload run. You can then change the compatibility mode. You have to do it yourself. David makes a very good point. A very good point there. Thank you, David, for putting that in. Now, the three tools I mentioned, the map tool, the DMA tool, the data migration assistant, and the experimentation assistant, database experimentation assistant, they're all available for free. Go to your favorite search engine, download them and install them, which is what I have done on my VM here. And then you can set it up. It's really easy. You can point it to a SQL database. It's got a SQL database that you can then query. And you can run through this inventory and assessment wizard. Now, it helps you collect information from several different inventory scenarios. I'm looking at Windows computers here. You can literally look at Unix and Linux computers. You can look at VMware computers. You can look and specify whether it's Exchange or whatever. And I've chosen SQL Server with database details. And I'm going to click Next. You then choose the discovery method. So I'm going to use Active Directory Domain Services, but you can use Windows Networking. You can point it at a System Center Configuration Manager. You can input or tell it to scan an IP range, manually enter the computer names if you want to, or import them from a file. I'm just going to use AD for it to discover what I've got. Then I need to put in a domain. So my domain is gre.com, and it's going to be gre/jealous, and this is where I have to remember the password. Oops, a daisy. I know what it is. I am GRE-LSG, not jealous. And if I click next there, we're no good. I want to find all the computers in my domain and my organizational units in AD. Okay, I'm going to use this credential, my LSG credential. I'm going to click next. I'm going to specify, there's only one credential, I don't need to specify an order, and I'm going to click finish. And it'll go away and it will discover the machines for me, or it should. And if I expand the details here, we should see it ticking over. He says. Okay, so it's looking at level, and it's now looking at 2 of 13 machines. It'll do this quite quickly for me, or so it should. But as long as the virtual machine is connected to your domain, it'll be able to find this for you. So if it's like across data centers, or if it's maybe you've got it in an AWS, but you've got your Active Directory plumbed in, it'll find this for you. Okay, and it's discovered that for me. You can see I've got 13 different instances in there, and in a second it should let me generate the report. So it's completed. I can close that down. It then gives me a count of my SQL Server version. So I've got 5 SQL Server 2017, and I've got 1, as you can see there, SQL Server 2008 R2. It tells me what I've got installed, whether it's the database engine, integration services, reporting services. I've got data quality services on too, whether I've got SQL Server R services in there, what licensed editions and what free editions. Now you can see there I use developer edition, so I don't have to pay for licenses. But if you were looking at enterprise, it will tell you all these, so you can quickly work out how much your licensing bill is going to be. But you can also see that you've got some legacy. You've got some legacy data platform software in here. So I'm going to click on the generate the self-assessment report. Okay, and I'm going to click close, and it opens that report for me. So I'm just going to copy this to my machine here, if I can find a folder for it. Oh, find a folder for it. That's a lot of words, that is. And then I'll do date organized. And if I open up this, oops, I copied it to the wrong place. So let me copy it down here. And I'm going to stick it in here, paste, copy and replace. I think I've probably now copied the wrong one, so let's go back here. This is the one I want. Copy that. And then minimize, and drop on here and paste it. Okay, so that's the one I've run today. If I open this up, we get a nice Excel document giving us a breakdown or a summary of what we've got. It tells us the database services, integration services, and reporting, what the computer names are, the instance names, the server product name, here's my naughty one, the edition it's running on, is it clustered or not, what's the cluster name, the SQL Service start mode, so whether it's in manual or automatic, the language, the subdirectory, the operating system, the service pack level, and so on. I've got another question here. Can't see the spreadsheet. Oops, sorry, David. Thank you for that. I'm running on the wrong screen. Here's the spreadsheet. Okay, and you can see the operating system architecture type, whether it's 64-bit, the number of cores. You get all this information that can be really useful when it comes to migrating. So you know, like how much memory your existing server's got, what storage space it's got, what operating system is currently running on. So you've assessed this, and I can see that I've got one little horrible SQL Server 2008 instance still running. So okay, I'm going to do a migration. Let me do some investigation work on that. So I fire up the database or the data migration assistant, and I'm going to create a new assessment here. I'm not going to do a migration. Okay, so I'm going to give my project a name. I'm going to go webinar demo. Okay, the source is going to be a SQL Server, and my target, I'm going to stay on premises. I'm not doing this to the cloud in this case. If I click this drop-down list there, we can do Azure SQL Database, we can do a managed instance, we can do a SQL Server on Azure Virtual Machine, or we can do another SQL Server. I'm going to click on Create there. And this is where we have to wait a few Microsoft minutes. Hopefully this process doesn't take too long. Just be advised here, these tools, they are geared up towards Microsoft. As you would imagine, they're their tools. So they do tend to push you towards, if you look in the cloud, for example, they do tend to help push you towards Azure as opposed to AWS or any other cloud platform. So my targeted version, what am I going to move to? Well, I know I'm going to move to SQL Server 2017. Okay, and I want to look at compatibility issues and potentially new features as well. And I'm going to click Next. Then in the server name, I'm going to put my SQL Server 2008. I'm going to authenticate using Windows. I'm going to connect. And then I'm going to specify all the databases that I want to check. If I want to, I can pass in any extended events or profiler traces in here to assess those as well. I'm not going to do that in this case. I'm going to click on Add, and then I'm going to start my assessment. And these are only really small databases. It'll go through, it'll scan things like, make sure I've started it. Assessment in progress. It'll look through the stored procedures. It'll look for any sort of code and syntax. So really old stuff. If you notice there, I've got the Northwind databases installed on here. they're really old sample databases that have been around for a while. Some of the join syntax is written in an old style that has been deprecated. It should pull that up. The same for pubs. And it'll just tell us any things we need to fix before we take this database up to SQL Server 2017. Now, I'm not going to run through the actual migration process with you here. I'm just showing you these tools in use and why they're quite useful. But hopefully any second now we will get some results back, which we do. So it gives us compatibility 140, so compatibility 14. If we want to take this up to compatibility 114, is an unqualified join. Okay, it shows us the issue. Okay, so it gives us some information around the issues. It gives us an example, and then it actually tells us the procedure in the database. So it's in my cust order history. It's using the old style join syntax. This can have poor performance. You might want to rewrite that into a proper join. And then if you scroll down, if you can click on, which I can't do on this particular one, but if I could scroll down a little bit more here or export the report, okay, and it's in a JSON file. I don't want to be bothered with that now, sorry. But if I could recommend fix it, actually show you how to fix it, so how to rewrite your code, and you can obviously want to test that before you do it. But it would tell you what you needed to do to fix it to run at this compatibility level, and it'll do that for each database as well. And it's mainly the join, unqualified joins in this case, that it's reporting on. And then we can work out whether we're going to fix that before or after. There's no reason why you couldn't fix it before, and then migrate as normal afterwards. So this tool is a really, really useful tool. It can help you identify any issues. It's kind of it's replaced the old Upgrade Advisor, if you've ever come across that. It's a really good tool for showing any issues that you need to fix either before or after, and it can help you with that migration process too. So now that I've done this, I'm good to go. I might use the experimentation tool, and then what I would likely do, I would use SP Help Rev Login to move on my SQL Server 2008 instance here. You can see I've got all my databases that we've just assessed. I would use perhaps SP Help Rev Login to move my logins across to a new server I wanted to run on. So I remove any orphaned users. I can move any jobs across. Okay, and there are various tools you can use to do that. But you can there's sort of PowerShell scripts and a bunch of other stuff you can do to automate a lot of this as well. I get those moved across beforehand, and then it's just a case of moving the databases in my outage window. And if I really wanted to keep it small, I could take the backup, configure log shipping between my 2008 instance and whichever version of SQL Server 2017 it was going to, let it keep it warm for a period of time until I was ready to cut over. Then it keeps my migration window really, really small. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my slides. I've not got many left. Oops, I know I definitely want to go from the beginning. So let me see where I got to. This is where I got to. But whatever you do with your SQL Server 2008 and your legacy SQL Server instances, do have a plan. Okay, we can help. We can give you help you with an initial assessment of your SQL Server estate, give you an idea of what's involved in migrating. Okay, that out of support server to a newer version, whether you wanted to migrate to on-premises SQL Server, when you migrated to Azure, we can help with that. We can leave it with you there. We can help you execute that plan if you want to, and we can help you optimize your new solution as well. Okay, but if you don't want to talk to us, feel free to get in touch, but do have a plan. Treat it like a major project, because it is, and then if you treat it that way, you're less likely to come up short when it comes to actually doing it. You don't want it to fail. You want it to be successful, because you want it to have a minimum impact, a minimum risk on your business. Now that brings us to the end of the session. We've discussed how many legacy SQL instances are out there in the wild, and the poll actually showed, or similar percentages to what I've seen. We've spoken about the options you've got available to you. You can do nothing. You can get a custom support contract. You can migrate to an Azure IaaS VM, or you can upgrade and migrate your on-premises SQL Server and modernize basically to either a newer on-premises version or the cloud. We talked about making a decision between in-place upgrades and side-by-side migrations. And we've looked at the free tools that can help with your migrations, and we've spoken about the migration process. And that is pretty much the end of the seminar. If you've got any questions, feel free to chat them into the Q&A chat pod, or you can email them to me as well. The contact details are on the screen there. If you're interested or would like any further information on our services, you can get in touch as well. Thank you all for coming. What was the name of the SP to get the logins with Sid? It's SP Help Rev. I'm not sure if I'm typing this like Help Rev Login. Okay, again, if you Google that, just Google SP Help Rev Login. It might not be that exact syntax. It'll take you to a Microsoft site. You will get 2 bits of code to run. You execute the store procedure. The output of that executing that store procedure is basically your create login script with SIDS. And you take that and run it on your run the create script on your new server. What can't you see, David? Sorry. Oh, sorry. I do apologize. Right. Okay. Sorry. Here we go. Can you see that? It's in the chat, David. I said all panelists and attendees, SP Help Rev Login. Let me, how can I type it in here? Let's try it this way. Let me just Google it for you. Let me just call it up and I'll go here. And I'm going to do SP Help Rev Login. Okay, this is what you want. So if you take and copy this store procedure here, it creates 2 store procedures for you. It'll create them in master. Execute this to create the procedures. Execute that on the legacy system. On the legacy system, it'll generate a create script. Take the output of that to your new server and execute it there, and it will create all the logins off that box. If you want to tidy your logins up, that's the opportunity to do so. But between executing the store procedure on your legacy and recreating them on your new one. Hopefully that's clear to everybody. Okay, well, thank you all for your time. Any other questions? Is everybody good? Thanks, David. Thank you for your questions. Great. Thank you, David. Thank you, everybody.